I never expected buying a house for my parents would nearly destroy my relationship with them. My name's Nolan, I'm 31, and up until recently, I thought I had a pretty tight-knit family. I'm not the most emotional guy, grew up with that old school, provide for your family, keep your head down kind of mindset, but I've always believed actions speak louder than words. And for years, all I ever wanted was to pay them back for everything they sacrificed for me growing up. They weren't rich, far from it. My dad worked double shifts at a packaging plant, and my mom took on night jobs cleaning offices when things got rough. Even when we barely scraped by, they never made me feel like a burden. Birthdays, Christmases, even when we couldn't afford anything fancy, they still made the day feel special. I remember my mom once pretending she forgot my birthday, just so she could surprise me with a used bicycle she secretly bought with tips from her cleaning job. That kind of thing sticks with you. It stays in your bones. So when my startup finally took off last year, after 6 long years of grinding, failing, pivoting, and sleepless nights, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my first big check. A clean, no strings attached thank you. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. I didn't even tell my girlfriend. I just worked with a realtor in the background, found a cozy 3-bedroom ranch-style home in the suburbs, not too far from where they lived, but far enough to feel like an upgrade, and signed the deed. Paid in full. No mortgage. No debt. Just a clean slate. When I finally handed them the keys, my mom cried so hard I thought she was going to faint. My dad hugged me like I was still 10 years old, and he'd just come back from a work trip. It felt right. Like, finally, I was giving them the comfort they never had. And for a few weeks, it was perfect. I'd swing by on Sundays, bring groceries, fix up little things around the house. My mom got into gardening again. My dad actually smiled when talking about retirement. It was quiet, peaceful, until my brother got involved. Now, let me explain something about my younger brother, Dean. He's 29, and for lack of a better word, he's always been the golden child. Not because he's particularly talented or hardworking. Actually, the opposite. He's always been the type to drift. He dropped out of 2 different community colleges, hopped between jobs, and somehow always managed to land on his feet. Why? Because someone else always picked up the pieces. Usually my parents. Sometimes me. Dean has that charm that works on people who don't look too closely. He's funny, slick, always has a story or excuse ready. When he announced 2 years ago that he was getting married to his girlfriend, fiancée at the time, everyone clapped like he just got into med school. I wanted to be happy for him, I really did, but something about it felt off. His now wife, Sierra, is one of those people who smiles with her mouth, not her eyes. Always sizing you up, always performing for some invisible audience. And from the very beginning, I could tell she didn't like me. Not that I cared. I didn't buy the house for her, or even for Dean. It was for them, for mom and dad. For all the years they put everyone else first. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing little changes. Dean and Sierra were over more often than not. At first, I didn't think much of it. Families visit, right? But it wasn't just visits. It was sleepovers. Then it was, oh, we'll just crash here for the weekend. Then suddenly, Dean's gaming console was in the living room, and Sierra was reorganizing the kitchen like she owned the place. I started feeling like a guest in my own gift. The real red flag came one afternoon when I dropped by unannounced with groceries. My mom looked surprised, almost panicked, to see me. You should have called, she said, eyes flicking toward the hallway. I heard a Baby Name podcast playing from the bedroom and saw Sierra's jacket on the banister. Dean wasn't even home. I brushed it off. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I was being territorial about a house that technically wasn't mine anymore. I signed the deed over to my parents, not myself. But still, something about the energy in the place had changed. My dad was quieter. My mom seemed more tired. And Sierra? She was everywhere. Hosting brunches, hanging decorations, even posting Instagram stories with captions like #OurCozyCorner and growing family needs growing space. That last one stuck with me. At first, I said nothing. Because again, it wasn't my place. But that sentence, that whole vibe, growing family needs growing space, was the beginning of the unraveling. It planted something in my head, a suspicion I didn't want to believe. The next time I came over, my parents weren't in the living room. Sierra and 2 of her friends were sprawled out on the couch, flipping through baby magazines. My mom's sewing kit, her favorite hobby, had been shoved into a laundry basket on the floor. When I asked where she was, one of the girls shrugged. I think she's in the garage. Or maybe outside. Outside. In the middle of January. I found my mom in the cold, sitting on a fold-out chair by the side of the house, bundled in a coat and sipping lukewarm tea. She gave me this small, tight smile and said, "They just needed a little space." Sierra's been feeling nauseous lately. That was the first time I saw it, the guilt in her eyes. The apology she couldn't say out loud. I didn't say anything that day. I just nodded, kissed her on the forehead, and drove home. But that image, my mom sitting outside her own house, trying not to disturb her pregnant daughter-in-law, stayed with me. It simmered. I started noticing more. Dean answering their landline, intercepting mail, even referring to the house as ours in casual conversation. At one point, he even told me to text first before coming over because they were trying to stick to a baby-safe schedule. I wanted to believe this was all temporary, that once the baby came, Dean and Sierra would move out, start their own life, that my parents would get their peace back. But then came the baby shower, and everything changed. The day of the event, I showed up with a wrapped gift and a bottle of sparkling juice. It was a Sunday afternoon. I hadn't been over in a week, and I figured this would be a good chance to reconnect. Celebrate the baby, see my folks, maybe even let things smooth over. I opened the front door and froze. There were balloons everywhere. Loud music playing from the Bluetooth speaker I had bought my dad for Christmas. People I didn't recognize, Sierra's extended family, I guessed, filling the kitchen, laughing, drinking, dancing. I stepped into the living room, looking for someone familiar, when I saw her. My mom, asleep on the couch. No blanket, no pillow, just curled up like an afterthought. And my dad was standing by the corner of the kitchen, eating a cold plate of food, balancing it in one hand. Not even a seat offered to him. I blinked. Took a second to process it all. Then I walked into the room, and Sierra spotted me. She raised her plastic cup and smiled. "Oh hey, Nolan," she chirped, like I was some distant cousin who'd accidentally wandered in. "You found us. Don't worry about bringing food. We're all set. You can just leave the gift on the table." I stared at her, then at my mom, still asleep, then at my dad, chewing slowly like he wasn't even tasting it. I cleared my throat. "What's going on?" I asked. Sierra cocked her head. "Baby shower. Didn't Dean tell you? We figured it made more sense to have it here. I mean, we are the growing family now." And that's when it hit me. That smug smile. That sentence. We're the growing family now. Like this was their house. Like my parents were just extras in the background of her little Instagram perfect life. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the worn manila envelope I hadn't touched in months. The original deed. My name on the buyer's line. Their names on the ownership. I walked over to the table in the center of the room, the one covered in pink cupcakes and gift bags, and placed the deed right there, on top of a stack of unopened presents. Everything stopped. Conversations, music, chewing. The whole room seemed to tilt. I looked up and said, "We need to talk." Sierra blinked at me, confused at first. Then her eyes dropped to the envelope, and her lips parted slightly. I could tell she didn't recognize it. Not immediately, but she knew it was something. Something important. I didn't say anything else. Just stood there and watched the slow realization ripple through the room like a cold breeze. Dean appeared a few moments later, all swagger and fake charm, laughing with two of Sierra's uncles. But he stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me. When he saw the envelope, his face dropped, not in a panicked way at first, but more like that flash of irritation when someone ruins your punchline. His jaw tightened, and he walked straight over. "Hey," he said under his breath, as if we were the only two people in the room. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I looked past him, toward the couch. My mom was still asleep, or pretending to be. My dad had now sunk into a folding chair in the corner, fiddling with a napkin in his lap. Dean followed my gaze, and then lowered his voice even more. "Seriously, man, what's your problem? Why are you being weird?" I finally turned to face him. "This isn't your house." His jaw flexed. "No one said it was." "Then stop treating it like it is." Sierra stepped in before he could respond. She placed a hand on Dean's arm, then gave me that polished little smile that never reached her eyes. "Okay, this is clearly not the time for whatever this is. We're celebrating. For the baby. Your nephew, by the way." She said it like I'd somehow forgotten. Like I was the one making a scene. I took a step back and looked around the room. No one said anything. Some people avoided my eyes, pretending to be interested in their cups. A few watched eagerly, as if waiting for the next line in a soap opera. And there were my parents, silent in the background, their own house full of strangers who didn't care about them. I didn't blow up. I didn't yell or flip the table, though I wanted to. I just said, "Enjoy the party," and walked out. That should have been it. I should have cut ties then. I should have done something drastic. But the truth is, I wasn't ready. Not yet. I still wanted to believe my parents had a say in all this. That they would speak up. That they would reclaim their home. But they didn't. Over the next few weeks, things only got worse. I tried to visit again the following weekend. Just me. No drama. But Sierra answered the door like she lived there. She barely opened it enough for me to see inside. "They're napping," she said, clutching a mason jar of cucumber water. "Can it wait?" I just wanted to check in. She gave a tight smile. "They're fine. I'm making sure of that." Then she closed the door. The next time, Dean was the one who answered. "You know, bro, it's kinda disruptive when you just show up unannounced all the time," he said. "We're trying to keep a calm environment. For the baby." I wanted to scream. For the baby. The baby hadn't even been born yet, and already it was being used like a gatekeeping pass. So I stopped coming. I started calling instead. My mom would pick up, sometimes. Her voice always sounded thin, like she was whispering in a hospital waiting room. "We're okay, Nolan. Really. It's just they need a little help right now. You know how young couples are." Yeah, I did. I knew exactly how they were. Eventually, I began hearing less and less from them. My calls went unanswered. My texts left on read. Birthdays passed without thank yous. It was like I was being gently erased. Then came the voicemail. It was about a month after the baby shower. I was working late when it buzzed in. It was my dad. His voice was low, almost shaky. "Hey, Nolan. Just wanted to say thanks for the, everything. But we're thinking maybe it's best if you don't visit for a while. There's a lot going on, and we're trying to keep things peaceful here. You understand." Click. I stared at my phone like it had just punched me. That was the moment. The true turning point. Not the party. Not the couch. Not even the door being shut in my face. It was that voicemail. The way my dad, the man who once carried me on his shoulders through a snowstorm so I wouldn't get my shoes wet, was now asking me to stay away from the house I bought him. I didn't respond right away. I just let it sit. For days. And then one evening, around 9 p.m., I got a text from my cousin Ashley. "Hey, random question. Did you sell your house to Dean?" I blinked. My house. I called her immediately. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. I didn't want to stir anything, but my mom said something about Dean and Sierra planning renovations. Like, full-on nursery remodels and a backyard patio. And they told her they're finally owning their place. Said they're putting down roots. I was silent. Ashley added, "But that's not true, right? You gave it to your parents." "I did," I said. "I never gave it to him." And that's when I checked the county records. I remember sitting in my apartment, staring at the screen, heart thudding. I pulled up the property lookup site, typed in the address, hit enter. Owner, joint tenancy, Dean underscore, and Sierra underscore. I refreshed the page. Twice. It didn't change. I read the date of the transfer. 2 weeks ago. I sat there, jaw slack, fingers clenched around the edge of the desk. Somehow, my parents had signed over the deed to Dean and Sierra. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a technicality. They had transferred ownership. And no one had told me. Not a word. I didn't sleep that night. I kept pacing, checking the record over and over. Checking texts, voicemails, anything for a clue. Nothing. Just silence. I didn't want to believe it. I still don't, to be honest. I told myself maybe Dean had manipulated them. Maybe Sierra had lied. Fake documents, pressured them. But deep down I knew. My parents gave it to them. Gave away the house I bought for them. The next day, I drove straight there. No text. No call. Just parked on the street and walked up to the front porch. There was a baby banner still taped to the window. The wind was picking at the corners. I rang the doorbell. Sierra opened the door, holding the baby, swaddled, asleep. She looked smug. "Oh," she said, pretending to be surprised. "Nolan, this is unexpected. Where are Mom and Dad?" She glanced back into the house. "Resting. Get them." She narrowed her eyes. "Is this really the best time?" I didn't move. She sighed. "Fine." I stepped inside without waiting for permission. The living room was different. Their old couch was gone, replaced with a sleek, gray sectional. The walls were freshly painted. The photo of me, my brother, and our parents at my college graduation was missing from the mantel. In its place, a framed sonogram. My parents came out a minute later, shuffling. My mom in slippers, my dad in socks. Both looking older than they had a month ago. "Nolan," my mom whispered. "Why?" I asked. My voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" They looked at each other, then at me. My dad swallowed hard. "Dean said. He said it would be temporary. That it would help them get a loan. Just a paper thing." My mom added quickly, "He promised we'd still live here. That nothing would change." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. "They already changed it," I said. "They erased you." My dad looked away. My mom blinked fast, like trying to hold back tears. And then Dean walked in. "Okay, this is getting ridiculous." I turned slowly. "Don't act like this is some betrayal," he said, arms crossed. "You gave them the house. They decided what to do with it. That's not on me. You manipulated them." He shrugged. "They agreed. End of story." I took a deep breath, then looked at my parents. "I gave you that house," I said softly. "Not so you could give it away. Not so you could hand it over like a birthday present." My mom finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't mean to hurt you. But you did." Silence. And then Sierra, chipper as ever, said, "Well, what's done is done. We're the ones raising a child here. It makes sense." I turned to her. She smiled. And that was it. That was the moment I knew there was no coming back. No apology. No explanation. No justification would undo what they did. They didn't just give away a house. They gave away my trust. After that day, I didn't speak to any of them for a while. Not Dean. Not Sierra. Not even my parents. I'd like to say it was out of some kind of moral high ground, but the truth is, I was just broken. It felt like my chest had been hollowed out. Like someone had scooped out everything I believed about loyalty, love, family, and replaced it with static. Numbness. That same numbness followed me everywhere. To work. To the gym. Even to the coffee shop I used to love on Sundays. Nothing tasted right. Nothing felt right. I kept thinking back to that moment when I handed over the keys. My mom's tears. My dad's hand on my shoulder. That smile on their faces when they opened the door for the first time. I had never felt prouder. Never felt more like a son. And now? Now they were living in the guest room. Yes, the guest room. Because Sierra wanted the master for the nursery. My mom's garden had been pulled out and replaced with an above-ground kiddie pool. My dad's record player was boxed up in the garage. Every little corner of that home had been erased and replaced with, "We're starting our life here," energy. I didn't cry about it. I couldn't. Maybe part of me still held on to the idea that this was temporary. That one day, they'd realize what they'd done and call me. That I'd walk back into that house and find my parents sitting at their kitchen table again, drinking morning coffee like nothing had changed. But they didn't call. Days turned to weeks. Weeks into a couple months. Eventually, even the numbness turned to something uglier, shame. Shame that I'd let myself be used. That I'd handed over a gift only to be shoved out of the picture like a side character in a story I wrote. And the worst part? I started to believe what Dean said, that it was my fault. That I gave up my say the moment I handed over the deed. That I should have seen it coming. So I stopped showing up to family events. I skipped birthdays. Ignored group chats. I muted their numbers and started answering unknown calls with suspicion. I even pulled away from my girlfriend, which, yeah, that one still hurts. Her name was Maya. We'd been together for nearly 2 years, and she'd always been my biggest cheerleader. But after the house incident, I became someone else, closed off, bitter, constantly spiraling into self-blame. She tried. God, she tried. But I pushed her away one time too many. The last thing she said before leaving was, "You're allowed to be hurt, Nolan, but you don't have to drown in it." I didn't respond. I didn't even ask her to stay. And when the door closed behind her, I just sat there on the floor for an hour. Maybe longer. That was rock bottom. No family. No girlfriend. Just a downtown apartment I barely noticed anymore, and the buzzing ache of betrayal I couldn't turn off. But here's the thing about rock bottom. There's nowhere left to fall. At some point, all that pain calcifies. You stop crying and start asking different questions. Not, "Why did this happen?" but "What now?" And that's where the rise began. Not dramatic. Not like in the movies. Just small, quiet things. Steps. Shifts. First, I started going back to the gym, not to punish myself, but because the only hour of the day I didn't feel like a walking bruise was when my body was moving. I didn't chase PRs or six-pack abs. I just showed up. Every day, even when I didn't want to. Then, I picked up a new side project. An app I'd shelved 2 years ago because it wasn't the right time. It was a budgeting tool for first-gen adults. Kids like me who'd grown up translating bills for their parents and learning about credit scores through trial and error. I gave it a dumb, working title, Breadcrumb, and started coding again. Not for money, just for me. I even reached out to an old mentor, Marcus, someone I hadn't spoken to since my startup days. He asked how I'd been. I told him the truth, no sugarcoating. Hurt, I said, but I'm building something again. He paused, then said, good, build with the bruises. They're the real blueprints. That stuck with me. Meanwhile, I started seeing a therapist. Nothing intense at first, just video calls once a week. But talking to someone who wasn't involved, who didn't flinch when I said, I feel like I was thrown out with the recycling, changed something in me. One session, I said, I don't understand how they could do it. After everything. And she replied, maybe the question isn't how they did it, but why you thought they never could. I hated that sentence, but it followed me. Because the truth was, Dean had always been this way, and my parents had always made excuses for him. I just didn't want to see it. I needed them to be better, to be the heroes I imagined when I was 10 and they were scraping together coins for my lunch money. I started revisiting childhood memories, replaying moments I'd buried under they tried their best. Like the time my parents sold my video game console to help cover Dean's car repairs, but told me it had been stolen because they didn't want me to be mad at my brother. Or how Dean always got a new phone while mine had to last 4 years. How Sierra once insulted my career at a family barbecue and no one said anything. How my dad once said, Dean's just finding himself, when I pointed out he hadn't had a job in 8 months. It was always there. The favoritism, the bending, the slow erosion of boundaries. I just didn't want to believe it went deep enough to give him my house. But now I knew, and knowing gave me power. So I leaned in. I doubled down on Breadcrumb, turning it from a side project into a full-pitch deck. Marcus introduced me to a few VCs who were surprisingly interested. Apparently, financial literacy was hot again. Go figure. I hired 2 freelance developers, launched a beta, created a small online community where people could share their budgeting stories. And little by little, it caught on. The feedback was emotional. People saying things like, I wish this existed 5 years ago, or my parents never taught me this. Thank you. It reminded me why I'd started building things in the first place. Not for applause, not even for legacy, just to help. That's what kept me going. My therapist noticed the shift, too. One day, she said, you're grieving, but you're not just grieving your family. You're grieving the idea of them. That landed harder than I expected. She was right. I had spent my whole life seeing them as something they never really were. And now I was mourning the version of them that only existed in my head. That kind of grief is weird. Quiet. It doesn't look like crying into a pillow. It looks like deleting old voicemails. Like skipping Thanksgiving. Like seeing your childhood photos and feeling nothing. But through all that, something strange started happening. I began smiling again. Not often. Not big. But enough. I reconnected with Maya, slowly, carefully. We started getting coffee again. No labels. Just 2 people who still liked being in the same room. I started volunteering once a month at a youth center downtown, teaching teens about basic finance. Not because I was trying to be noble, but because I wished someone had done that for me when I was their age. And Breadcrumb? It exploded. One of our posts went viral on TikTok. A financial influencer made a video using our app to plan her wedding budget. Downloads tripled in a week. Investors started calling us. I wasn't rich, not yet, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't scraping. I was growing. On my own terms. Quietly. Steadily. And then, one day, I got a letter in the mail. A real, paper letter. From my parents. It was 3 pages long. My dad's handwriting. It started with, we don't know if you'll read this. And ended with, we made a mistake. I read it 3 times. Not because it said what I wanted, but because it didn't. They apologized. Sort of. Said they felt pressured. Said they thought they were doing what was best. Said Dean convinced them it would just be for a little while. That Sierra had insisted it was a legal necessity for the baby's future. But nowhere in those pages did they say, we were wrong. Nowhere did they say, we should have said no. They didn't ask for forgiveness. They didn't ask me to come home. They just told me their version of the story and left it at that. And as I folded the letter and set it down on my desk, I realized something. I didn't need them to say it. I didn't need closure. Because I already had something better. I had me. I didn't respond to the letter. Not out of spite. At least, not entirely. It was more about clarity. A strange calm had settled in after I read it. Like finally seeing the full picture after staring at fragments for so long. They had shown me who they were, not just in what they did, but in how they explained it. And once someone does that, you either accept it or you don't. I didn't. But that didn't mean I was done. In fact, reading that letter was what flipped the last switch in my head. Not the angry, chaotic switch, the cold one. The calculating one. The part of me that remembered all those months of sacrifice, all the 3 a.m. coding sessions, all the missed birthdays, the burnout, the ramen dinners, the secondhand hoodies worn until the elbows thinned out. That part of me knew something my parents never fully understood. I didn't just give them that house. I built it. With sweat. With failure. With pain. And someone else was living in it like I was a footnote. No, that wasn't how my story was going to end. So I started thinking differently. Strategically. Like I used to when I was running my startup before the funding rounds, before the hype. When I was just some guy with a whiteboard and a dangerous amount of caffeine. I wasn't going to knock on the door and demand justice. That's not how people like Sierra operate. They thrive on confrontation because they're good at spinning it. I could already imagine her looking shocked, pretending to cry, throwing words around like aggressive, jealous, or worse, unstable. I needed something better than outrage. I needed precision. So I got to work. The first thing I did was revisit the deed transfer. At first glance, everything looked clean. Legal. Signed. Witnessed. But one line caught my eye, power of attorney. That made my stomach drop. I remembered vaguely, about a year ago, my mom asking me to help her fill out a few papers at the bank. She was getting overwhelmed with paperwork and said it was just in case they needed help making decisions while settling into the new house. I didn't think twice. I signed, scanned, emailed, forgot about it. But now, it looked like Dean had used that very document to initiate the transfer, or at least laid the groundwork with it. It wasn't illegal, but it was grossly manipulative. Still, it opened a door I hadn't considered. So I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, Savannah Grant. She was a former classmate from undergrad, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but I remembered she specialized in estate law and loved a good challenge. When I told her the basics, she didn't hesitate. Send me everything, she said. Emails, documents, the deed, the power of attorney, even texts. I want it all. Within a week, she got back to me. You're right. It's not criminal, but it's shady. And there's a chance we can argue undue influence, especially if your parents were misled into believing it was temporary. If we go to civil court, we could at least freeze the property title for review. That wasn't exactly revenge, but it was a start. Still, I didn't want a courtroom brawl. Not yet. What I wanted was a way to reclaim dignity, to reset the narrative. So I changed tack. I went back to the house. But not during the day. It was a Wednesday night, nearly midnight. I parked a block away and walked under the cover of dark. Not to sneak in, just to look. The porch light was on. Dean's truck was in the driveway. The living room window glowed with the soft blue flicker of a TV. I stood there for 5 full minutes, across the street, just watching. And that's when I saw it. On the front lawn. A realtor sign. At first, I thought I imagined it. But no, it was real. Propped right there in the yard. Coming soon. Open house Saturday. I took a photo. Then I called Savannah. I guess they're selling now, I said. My voice was flat, but inside I felt something hot and electric starting to burn. She laughed bitterly. That changes everything. How so? Because now there's a transaction. And if they sell under false pretenses, without informing your parents properly, or if your parents were misled into believing it was still their home, we have leverage. Especially if you, as the original donor, can prove the intent behind your gift. And if the sale goes through, we can issue a lease pendants to cloud the title. Explain that to me like I'm 5. We put a legal fog over the sale. Makes it messy. Scares off buyers. No one wants a lawsuit tied to a new home. That was the moment it all clicked. I didn't want the house back. Not really. What I wanted was control. Not to hold over them, but to reclaim the part of me they took. And if they were going to profit off my gift, they'd have to go through me. So I got to work again, this time with purpose. Step 1. I contacted the realtor listed on the sign. Pretended to be a buyer. Asked a few basic questions. Got confirmation. Yes, it would be a public open house. Saturday at 11 a.m. Perfect. Step 2. I called Maya. We'd kept in touch. Careful, gentle conversations. But we hadn't seen each other in person since everything went down. I wasn't even sure she'd want to be part of this. But I needed someone who understood the stakes. Someone I could trust. When I told her my plan, she listened quietly. Then she said, "I'll be there." Step 3. I prepped my presentation. Yes, a presentation. Not a PowerPoint or anything cheesy. Just a folder. Photos, emails, bank records, the original deed, a copy of the notarized power of attorney, even screenshots from Sierra's social media showing off their new home. One post, in particular, caught my eye. It was a video tour bragging about their investment property dreams and how it all started when we inherited a place. Inherited. That word. That lie. It sealed my resolve. Step 4. I called in a favor from a friend in local media. Nothing big. Just a real estate blogger who covered shady home flips and legal disputes. I told him everything, on the record. He was thrilled. "This is juicy," he said. "Can I come to the open house?" "Please do." Saturday came fast. I dressed sharp. Not flashy. Just clean. Confident. Maya met me at a cafe down the street, holding 2 coffees. She handed me one, looked me over, and smiled. "You look like a man about to take his story back." We walked to the house together. There were balloons on the mailbox. A welcome sign by the door. Inside, soft jazz played from a Bluetooth speaker, and Sierra stood near the kitchen island, laughing politely with prospective buyers. Dean wore a polo and khakis like he was running a car dealership. When he saw me, his face froze. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just stepped inside, Maya behind me. "Welcome," Sierra chirped, her eyes flicking between me and Maya like she couldn't decide whether to fake politeness or call security. "Didn't expect to see you today." I handed her a flyer. She unfolded it. "Read the first line." Her face went pale. Dean walked over, already annoyed. "What are you doing?" I turned slightly so the room could hear me. "Good morning. I'm Nolan. I was the original buyer of this home. Paid in full. Gave it as a gift to my parents. What you're standing in today wasn't built by flippers or investors. It was built by sacrifice. And it's currently the subject of a pending legal review." Whispers. Someone asked, "Wait, what?" I pulled out a manila folder and laid it on the island next to the charcuterie board. Anyone considering buying this property should know that the title is in dispute. A lease pendens is being filed Monday. Any sale may be subject to civil litigation. Dean's face turned bright red. "You can't do this." "Actually," Savannah said. "Yes, I forgot to mention, she showed up too. Right on time, he can. And I suggest you inform your realtor to update the disclosure forms immediately." Someone gasped. A woman in heels stepped back, muttering, "Oh, absolutely no." Sierra looked like she might faint. Dean opened his mouth to argue, but his voice cracked. He looked around and saw the blogger snapping photos. Flash, flash, click. Then I stepped close enough to whisper, "You want to profit off my gift? Do it somewhere else." And for the first time in my life, Dean had no comeback. Dean didn't speak. He didn't yell. He didn't shove me or threaten me or call the police. He just stood there, frozen, pale, lips pressed together so tight the edges turned white. His silence felt louder than anything he could have shouted. Sierra, meanwhile, looked like she'd swallowed a bucket of ice. Her perfect posture wilted. Her smile collapsed. Her hand trembled so violently that she set down her plastic cup before she dropped it. People were already leaving. Couples shuffled toward the door, whispering to each other, clutching their purses a little tighter, glancing back at us the way you look at a building you didn't know was on fire. The realtor tried to salvage the situation by smiling nervously and saying things like, "Well, make sure everything is clarified." But it was too late. The damage was done. The air had changed. The house, my house, had become a crime scene. Not legally, but morally. Even the walls felt tense. Savannah closed her briefcase with a click that sounded like a judge's gavel. Maya stood just behind me, hands in her pockets, but her presence alone was grounding. The blogger snapped one final photo before giving me a subtle nod and slipping out with the rest of the crowd. It was over. At least, the open house was. The real fallout hadn't even started. Once the door shut behind the last potential buyer, the whole place felt eerily quiet. The jazz music still played from the speaker in the corner, a soft saxophone that suddenly made the room feel colder, not warmer. Dean broke first. You're unbelievable, he muttered, stepping toward me. You just love making everything about you, don't you? You couldn't stand seeing us finally get ahead, right? You just had to ruin it. Get ahead, I repeated. By selling a house you manipulated Mom and Dad into giving you? He flinched. A micro-flinch, but I saw it. Sierra stepped in, swallowing her panic and replacing it with her favorite expression, self-righteous, wounded innocence. We didn't manipulate anyone, she said, voice shaky but defiant. Your parents offered. They wanted to help us build a future. They want their grandchild to have a stable life. Why can't you accept that? Why do you want to keep tearing the family apart? I looked at her for a long moment. You don't get to talk about family, I said quietly. Not after what I saw when I came here. My mom sleeping on a couch while you entertained guests. My dad standing like a stranger in his own kitchen. You didn't want a home. You wanted a stage. Sierra's mouth tightened. Dean tried again. Look, Nolan, anything you're trying to do legally, it won't work. You can't just stop us from selling. We signed the deed fair and square. Savannah cleared her throat. That's not entirely true, she said, stepping forward. Based on the evidence we've gathered, there's a strong argument for undue influence, potential elder coercion, misrepresentation of terms. And because the original gift had intended use, as supported by text messages, emails, and photographs, any sale without the donor's knowledge can be subject to review. Dean blinked. What does that even mean? It means, she said, that you're not selling this house. Not this year. Probably not next year either. Sierra gasped. You can't do that. Savannah smiled politely. I just did. They were quiet after that. Not because they agreed, but because they finally understood they had no ground to stand on. What they thought would be an easy flip, a quick payout, a new chapter financed by my generosity and my parents' guilt, had turned into a legal sinkhole. And I wasn't even done yet. I turned to both of them and said, the house is off the market. And starting Monday, you'll be getting official notices. Not from me, I nodded at Savannah, but from the county. Dean muttered a curse under his breath, just low enough that he could pretend I didn't hear it. Sierra looked like she wanted to throw up. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't smiling. There was no thrill in any of this. It was just necessary, like setting a broken bone. I walked toward the door with Maya and Savannah, but before I stepped outside, I turned back one last time. Tell Mom and Dad I'll call them, I said, when I'm ready. Then I left. The next few weeks were interesting. The story went semi-viral thanks to the blogger. Nothing massive, but enough that it spread locally. People in town whispered. Neighbors watched. And suddenly, Dean and Sierra were not the glowing young couple starting a new chapter. They were the ones being investigated for forcing elderly parents out of their home. They hated it. Their realtor dropped them. The buyer interest evaporated. And just like Savannah predicted, the county flagged the title. For review. Indefinitely. They weren't selling anything now. They weren't profiting off me. Not anymore. As for my parents, things were complicated. My mom called first. 3 times before I answered. When I finally picked up, she cried. Not hysterically, not dramatically, just softly. Quiet heartbreak. She apologized for everything. For not telling me, for getting manipulated, for letting it go on so long. I listened. Then I told her I needed time, space, distance to understand what our new relationship looked like. She accepted that. I think she knew she had to. My dad called a few days later. He didn't cry. He just talked. Really talked. About how guilty he felt. How small he'd felt in his own home. How Dean had slowly worn them down with promises and pressure and guilt trips. How Sierra knew exactly how to frame things so they sounded like family choices instead of control. He said, we wanted to believe them because we wanted to believe we were doing something good. I didn't respond to that. I couldn't. Not yet. But I didn't hang up. That was enough for him. The real turning point came 3 months later. My parents moved out. They didn't tell Dean and Sierra. They didn't ask permission. They packed their things while the two were out one afternoon, called a moving service, and left. Just like that. They moved into a modest rental across town. A place they could afford. A place that belonged to no one but them. And the second they did, the entire house of cards started collapsing. Dean called me in a fury. Where are they? What did you do? I laughed. Actually laughed. I didn't do anything, I said. They just finally did something for themselves. Then I hung up. A week later, they lost access to my parents' bank accounts. because my parents revoked the power of attorney. Then their utilities at the house were flagged for residency mismatch. Then the county sent them notice that the title review could take up to 24 months. Within a month, the pressure got to them, and they moved out. Not with a bang, not with a fight, just quietly, like they were sneaking away from the consequences that finally caught up with them. I learned through a neighbor that they left behind a ton of stuff in the garage. Boxes of baby supplies, decorations, even some furniture they bought expecting a payout from the sale. They didn't look back. My parents didn't ask me for another house. They didn't ask me for money. They didn't even ask for forgiveness. They just asked for a chance to rebuild their relationship with me. On new terms, equal terms, honest terms. And slowly, I gave them that. Not all at once. Not perfectly, but steadily. We started meeting for lunch once a week. Talking about normal things. Not the past. Not the house. Not Dean. Just life. And in those small, quiet moments, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. My parents were themselves again. Free, lighter, humbled, and healing. As for me, Breadcrumb got acquired 6 months later. Not a life-changing sale, but enough to give me real financial freedom. Enough to make all the nights I spent building something out of pain feel worth it. Maya and I started dating again. For real this time. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to grow with someone instead of around them. Dean and Sierra? They moved 2 states away, trying to outrun a reputation they built themselves. Last I heard, they were renting a cramped apartment, still fighting with the county over unrelated issues, still blaming everybody else for their problems. I don't hate them. I just don't think about them anymore. And that, more than any lawsuit, any confrontation, any speech at an open house, is the real revenge. Letting go, letting the truth settle, letting their consequences follow them without lifting a finger. The last time I drove past the house, the one I once imagined would be my parents' sanctuary, it was empty, the grass overgrown, the windows dusty. A title under review, notice taped crookedly on the front door. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. But then Maya squeezed my hand and said, "You didn't lose anything. You reclaimed yourself." I nodded, because she was right. And as we pulled away, watching the house grow smaller in the mirror, I felt something unshakable settle inside me. A truth so clear it finally closed the story. Some homes are built from wood and concrete. The real ones, the ones that matter, are built from boundaries. And once you learn that, no one can ever take your home from you again.